Welcome back to episode 20 of the Believe in Balance podcast. I'm your host, Dave Dancero. We've had a couple of bonus episodes in between the last discussion where we were talking age, tech, and falls. I had one that was out talking about my observations with folks having the wrong footwear and falling. But the title of this episode is related, and it's entitled, how do we create safe ways to build better balance? And I use that acronym SAFE because there's a lot that's been in the news recently about falls, particularly here in Rhode Island. We have one of the highest rates of seniors trying to stay independent, and we lack housing. And if you want to tune into other episodes, you can talk about or find solutions for what I talk about, providing aging in place, accessible living environments for our seniors. But there was an article written in my local paper trying to address the topic around how PTs are vital for screening and urging our federal leaders to embrace the SAFE Act, not to be confused with the SAVE Act, which is a whole nother thing that keeps getting our government shut down, back open, shut down. But we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about SAFE as in the acronym Stopping Addiction and Falls for the Elderly. In this HR 117-1S, if you're like looking this stuff up, it was designed to enhance fall prevention screening under Medicare. It still has not passed into law, primarily because it is still moving through the legislative process. I've been following this going back to when one of the first bills was submitted back in 2024. And, while there is bipartisan support, and even was back then, there's still the bill is still faced with a lot of problems, including competing legislative priorities. Just you can go down the list. It was reintroduced, then budgetary restrictions, amendments to cover new services. So the current state as of late 2025, early 2026, again, the bill has gained bipartisan co-sponsors and is actively supported, like groups like the APTA, or the American Physical Therapy Association. But the legislative goal is to really include fall risk assessments by PTs and OTs as part of the Medicare's annual wellness visit. So we can continue to advocate. There's some estimates that this bill could reduce $50 billion in annual costs for falls and Medicare. And like as I've told you, I'm not sitting still waiting for this to pass. I think I have reintroduced my Achieve Balance course, and then launched my Believe in Balance module, offer that course. And in less than the 2 years since this is being debated, I've launched 2 programs successfully to build better balance. So I'm not sitting around, is my point, waiting for folks to determine whether or not if this is something reimbursable. I'm just out there in the community doing. And as someone who has retrained their balance after a health scare and having a stroke that dramatically altered my balance, I had to rewire and rebuild the balance blueprint. In fact, I wrote an article that I'm going to share here. And again, this goes back to when I was writing for the National Stroke Association, but the title of the article was Rewriting the Balance Blueprint. And I think it's a perfect add-in here to this full episode. So here it goes. So balance, a task we master early in life, seems simple enough. But after a stroke or a neurological deficit or an injury, balance often needs to be relearned. And I use the analogy of thinking of how you first learned to ride a bike. In the beginning, your brain was overwhelmed by all the information it had to process: how fast to pedal, where to coast, how to steer, how to stop. So, riding that bike at one time took all of your focus. However, with a lot of practice, it eventually became automatic. And with continued exposure to this new situation, you build a new blueprint in the brain for the nervous system to follow. If you're trying to build better balance after an injury, the nervous system must be challenged in order to rewire your balance. That roadmap has to be rewritten. The goal is to get your body and nervous system to rebuild this blueprint together. And I give 4 quick tips for building better balance. And remember, when I wrote this back some 10 plus years ago, we didn't have the technology and the tools that I talk about in my course that are now available today. So here's tip 1: have a written plan. That hasn't changed, or a calendar for building your balance. That's why in my modules of my um, Believe in Balance course, I go over those components to your balance and an agenda for you to follow to kind of know where you are, because you have to know where you are in order in your recovery and exactly where you want to be in X amount of months, for example. That's why we do the mobility assessments as part of the course. And I encourage them, and as I did in this article, to record how long you can currently balance in different positions. That's that 4-stage balance. Maybe how long it takes you to get up and out of a chair and turn around and come back from a set distance, called the timed up and go. And also how many repetitions or how many sit to stands can you do over a set amount of time. All those are mentioned in my course. Number 2, make balance training fun. Investigate. At the time, I was using Wii, and Wii Fit has a great balance system, but now you have all types of 3D camera systems, all types of gamified platforms that you can look at, and that's what I'm building into the course to expose you. And you can't manage what you can't measure, but if you don't know what's out there to help you, then you're not able to get the best outcomes. So I talk about consider getting, back into sports or trying activities that you once enjoyed, like golfing, for example. Maybe just practicing weight shifting while putting, balancing on one leg to return to other hobbies like dance or other things you might have once enjoyed. Number 3, practice, practice, and practice, but with purpose. Building better balance certainly requires more than performing 2 sets of 10 repetitions twice a day. Hey, that's the case, but that's certainly a start. And that's when we do the foundations level program in the course. I do, uh, help you get started, but I often ask you to connect with a physical therapist, whether it be remotely during some type of tele rehab or in a practicing PT's office. Um, you got to find little ways to sneak in more balanced practice throughout the day, and that's what a skilled PT can help you do. Try, for example, to stand on one leg by brushing your teeth. Those are easy ways to start. You'd be surprised, and as I talked about in the balance module, how hard it actually is if you don't try that. Try doing that for even 15 seconds to 30 seconds. There's some good, excuse me, evidence now about the ability to just stand on one leg for a minute or more in terms of your strength and your predictions for your longevity. So I talk about that in the course as well. And you want to use, the mirror is a great free tool to provide instant visual feedback on your progress. Again, we dive into that in the course. And going way back, it was a little bit of a challenge when I wrote this article to film your progress. But now everyone has a supercomputer in their pocket, or if they don't, they have someone who can film for them. But you can use inexpensive tools like that to help you measure your progress from week to week, month to month, year to year. And you can see the before and after challenges and wins as a result of your balance training. You can also record your health and rehab goals and replay them frequently to help keep you motivated. I talk about this in my upcoming book, Closure After Stroke, that I would put myself out there, even if I had no, real confidence that I can do it. I told myself I was going to run a marathon again, and I put that goal on paper. At the time, I made it public in my blog. It got picked up on this medium. At the time, it was the mobility column for the National Stroke Association, and I talked about goal setting, and then I made it happen. You have to believe before you can achieve. That's in part why I call the course "Believe in Balance." If you're watching this podcast on Substack, you do have to write goals down. You have to record them. You have to share them so that you're accountable to yourself, but to also the public if you want to choose to go that route. So the final part, because I dive deeper into this, is that there are three parts to balance control. And I talked about this in the overview workshop. I'll put the links into this episode in the show notes here, because I talk about these three things in terms of creating awareness. And the ability to maintain your balance certainly involves effective communication between these control systems. They are all sensory in nature, but here they are. One, visual. That's the position of your head in relation to your environment. I work in eyes open and eyes closed with all my patients that I work one-on-one with. I don't talk about that in the foundations program, because I would want you to work with a skilled professional, so you'd have someone nearby when you first add that element of difficulty. So number two, a big word called somatosensory, which is the relative position of your body parts. That's also known as proprioception. PTs like to throw that word out a lot, of how your joints, your muscles, your nerves all work in coordination. And then finally, the vestibular system, which is the orientation of the head and speed of movement. So again, I dive deeper in my book about these and retraining the balance blueprint chapter. But for the purposes of talking about what you can access currently, you can immediately go to, if you're a member of Substack, a paid subscriber, you get access to my full course, Believe in Balance. And if you are heading over to Smart Moves PT, you can join in on the link that will take you to that balance workshop as a good overview on where to start. So I think that's where I want to leave it. When you have an opportunity to comment on any of the episodes or join me in the chat on Substack, you get a chance to ask me the questions. Any of my paid subscribers, they've come up with some really great questions. There was a lot of feedback I got on footwear alone. If you go back to the bonus episode that I did before this one aired, I talked about observing someone almost falling who had inappropriate footwear on. And we talk about all those components, and I happen to have the chart here for reference. Sorry, I stepped away. But if you're watching and looking on Substack for the video to this podcast, we talk about this Believe in Balance flow chart. And not only does the workshop allow you to understand what your fall risk is by the steady CDC's fall risk assessment, it also talks about whether or not you are, if you're lower risk, can join safely and start on the program self-paced. But it also will refer you out if it's inappropriate for you to start on your own, like for some of the reasons I pointed out to in this podcast episode, including, change in your visual changes. If you've having problems with medication or special nutrition needs, or those things that can kind of compete with one another. And again, footwear, as I mentioned, comes up, as well as home safety. And that's the other part of what I do. Is I flip this chart, I also offer a smart tech ready checklist. That post will be out shortly as a self-paced assessment for those folks that are starting the program, but also have finding themselves that they need some type of alert system at home to help them, whether it be for themselves or a loved one, to notify in the case of falls. Because even with all the best training, falls do happen. Um, so I think um, that's all for now. But my point is, I enjoyed getting that feedback on the last episode. And a lot of the add in modules that I direct into the course come from your feedback. So um, that's all for now. This has been David for the Believe in Balance podcast and the Believe in Balance course. Until next time, stay well, stay on your feet, and keep moving forward.